The latest on violence in Myanmar's Rakhine state and the flood of ethnic Rohingya refugees into Bangladesh. All times local 635 AM. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum says it's horrified by the ongoing attacks on Rohingya civilians and is calling on Myanmar's government to cease its military operations. Cameron Hudson, director of the museum's Simon's Jot Center for the Prevention of Genocide, says government efforts to deny Rohingya citizenship rights, restrict their freedom of movement and the practice of their faith, and deny their basic human rights have all been identified as leading precursors to a genocide. In 2012, the museum awarded Myanmar leader Aung San Suu Kyi the Ali Wiesel Award, its highest honor. Now, it says the ideals that she inspired appear absent in the defense of Rohingya. The museum says it implores Suu Kyi to use her position in government and her even more powerful voice to uphold those very ideals and work to stop the long-standing persecution and violence that threaten the very existence of Rohingya in Burma. 12:30 AM. The United Nations says the UN and its partners have a plan to provide up to 300,000 Rohingya Muslims fleeing from Myanmar to Bangladesh with food, shelter, water, healthcare and other services until the end of the year. UN spokesman Staffan Dujarric told reporters at UN headquarters on Friday that while many of the 270,000 Rohingyas who have fled violence in Rakhine state in the past 2 weeks initially arrived in Bangladesh by land, more are now making the journey by boat. He said 5 UN agencies have teams in Cox's Bazar where the Rohingyas are arriving, and the $7 million released from the UN Emergency Fund will allow the UN and its partners to those in desperate need of aid. Dujarric said Secretary-General Antonio Guterres spoke to Myanmar's leader Aung San Suu Kyi on Wednesday and delivered the same message to her that he said publicly. Guterres told reporters Tuesday the government must end the vicious cycle of violence and immediately reverse its long-standing policy and give Rohingya Muslims either nationality or legal status so they can lead normal lives and freely move, find jobs, and get an education. 6:30 p.m. More than 1,500 supporters of an Islamist political party have rallied in Pakistan's capital to express solidarity with Myanmar's Rohingya Muslims. The supporters of the Jamaat-e-Islami party demanded the expulsion of Myanmar's ambassador over violence against the Rohingya ethnic minority in his country. The demonstrators wanted to march Friday to Myanmar's embassy in Islamabad, but authorities placed shipping containers on key roads, preventing them from reaching the building. The head of Jamaat-e-Islami, Sirajul-Haq, urged the Organization of Islamic Countries to pressure Myanmar to stop the violence against the Rohingya. The violence began August 25 when Rohingya insurgents attacked Myanmar police and paramilitary posts, and the military responded with clearance operations. Many Rohingya homes were burned and an estimated 270,000 Rohingya fled to neighboring Bangladesh, according to the UN Refugee Agency. 6:15 p.m. A human rights group has released satellite images showing about 450 buildings destroyed in mainly Rohingya neighborhoods of one of the larger towns in the region of Myanmar hit last month with ethnic violence. New York-based Human Rights Watch on Friday released images taken September 2 showing blackened areas of Mungda. The group said satellite data detected active fires in that area August 28, and added that expert analysis showed that the damage seen was consistent with fire. The group's Deputy Asia Director, Phil Robertson, called on the Myanmar government to allow independent monitors into the area to investigate. The Myanmar government says nearly 400 people have been killed since last month in fighting it blames on insurgents. Rohingya Muslims say Myanmar troops and Buddhist mobs attacked them and destroyed their villages. An estimated 270,000 Rohingya have fled to neighboring Bangladesh in just 2 weeks. 4:40 p.m. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has promised more help for Rohingya Muslims who have fled to Bangladesh to escape violence in Myanmar, including the construction of refugee camps. Erdogan said Friday that Turkey plans to build safer and more livable camps in Bangladesh if its government allows it. Erdogan's wife and son, accompanied by the Turkish foreign minister, toured refugee camps in Bangladesh for minority Rohingya near the Myanmar border on Thursday. The president also promised 10,000 tons of humanitarian aid, including food, medical assistance and clothing. Turkish humanitarian organizations have been assisting Rohingya Muslims fleeing across the border since violence flared in Buddhist-majority Myanmar 2 weeks ago. About 270,000 Rohingya have fled to Bangladesh, the UN Refugee Agency says. 4:30 p.m. Malaysian officials say they are bracing for a possible influx of Rohingya Muslim refugees because of renewed violence in Myanmar, and that any people arriving by boat will be treated humanely. Recent violence in Myanmar's western Rakhine state has prompted 270,000 Rohingya to flee to neighboring Bangladesh, according to the UN Refugee Agency. It began when insurgents attacked Myanmar police and paramilitary posts and the military responded with clearance operations. Many Rohingya homes have been burned. Malaysia Maritime Enforcement Agency Director General Zulkifli Abubakar said there are no reports of new refugees heading to Malaysia, but it is monitoring the country's waters closely. Zulkifli said, "I won't say if we will accept or reject the boats. We will look at it on a case-to-case basis, but this time, we will consider it more from a humanitarian angle." Malaysia, which is already home to thousands of people from Myanmar, including 56,000 Rohingya, is cautious of being swamped by an influx of migrants. In 2015, boats carrying Rohingya and Bangladeshi refugees were pushed back into international waters by the Malaysian and Thai navies. Later, more than 1,600 refugees were taken in by Indonesia and Malaysia, 4:20 p.m. Thousands of Muslims in the Indian-controlled portion of Kashmir have held rallies in solidarity with Myanmar's Rohingya Muslim minority despite a curfew in some parts of the disputed region's main city aimed at preventing the protests. Rallies occurred in many places in Kashmir on Friday calling for the end of violence against Rohingya in Myanmar. Separatist leaders who challenge India's sovereignty over Muslim-majority Kashmir urged residents to protest after Friday congregational prayers in solidarity with the Rohingya. The UN Refugee Agency is reporting that 270,000 Rohingya have crossed from Myanmar into Bangladesh to flee violence that began 2 weeks ago when Rohingya insurgents attacked police posts, prompting the military to respond with clearance operations, 4:10 p.m. Thousands of Indonesian Muslims have held a rally near Borobudur, one of the world's famed Buddhist monuments, to condemn violence in Myanmar against minority Rohingya Muslims. Authorities barred protesters at the Defend Rohingya rally from entering Borobudur on the Indonesian island of Java, saying there was no connection between events in Buddhist-majority Myanmar and the Buddhist temple complex that was built in the 8th and 9th centuries. Protesters held Friday prayers at a mosque near the World Heritage Site and a rally afterward at which speakers railed against Myanmar's government. The UN says about 270,000 Rohingya have fled across the border into Bangladesh since August 25 to escape a military crackdown that followed attacks by Rohingya insurgents. Protests were also held in the Indonesian capital, Jakarta, and other cities, 4 p.m. The UN Refugee Agency is reporting a surge in the number of Rohingya Muslims who have crossed into Bangladesh from Myanmar, with an estimated 270,000 arriving in the last 2 weeks. The new number confirmed Friday by UNHCR spokeswoman Vivian Tan marks a major increase from the 164,000 estimated Thursday to have arrived since August 25. The exodus began after Rohingya insurgents attacked police posts, prompting the military to respond with clearance operations to root out any fighters hiding in villages of Rakhine state. Journalists have reported seeing village homes burning as recently as Thursday in the region of Buddhist-majority Myanmar.